Good morning, everyone. My name is Irena Bednarik, and I'm the Vice President of International Government Relations at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. On behalf of Forum Europe and HPE, I would like to warmly welcome you to the 7th edition of the Public Sector Transformation Conference. For those of you that have followed us throughout the years, you will know by now that this conference aims at offering an yearly platform catalyzing subject matter experts from throughout the European continent. And these subject matter experts will help us unpack very specific and very complex matters that pertain to the evolution and digitization of the public sector in the European Union. But this edition is special. So we will look at topics like data sovereignty, sovereign clouds, interoperability, data localization, and so on. But three very major developments took place since our last edition a year ago. The first one is the injection of huge capital into the European economy. You all know about the existence of the RRF, obviously, and over 700 billion euros financial envelope to help the European economy recover from the COVID pandemic. 20% of this envelope was in principle supposed to be dedicated to the digital transformation. However, now that majority of the national member states' plans have been approved by the European Commission, we can drive the positive observation that actually 26% of the total envelope is being dedicated to digital transformation in general. Out of this 26%, 36%, so the biggest vertical and financial envelope, is actually dedicated to the specific transformation of the public sector. So this is a clear indication that European governments do understand the potential of digitization of public sector. And as quoted in a recent article of Forbes 2 weeks ago, they are basically highlighting how digitization of public sector will actually drive the cloud uptake also in the private sector. So first element is really a huge financial injection into the economy. Secondly, Gaia X is up and running. We're delighted to have today with us the Gaia X CEO that will tell us much more about what is going on in the Gaia X framework. However, the big important evolution not only is that this framework is now up and running, and however, it is also already generating a very significant movements in the cloud markets in Europe. Actually, very recently, in fact, yesterday, a senior executive of a public cloud company posted in a blog their intention to develop features to offer their European customers more control on where the data is located. And actually, they intend to offer immunity from third government access to the data of European citizens. So very big shifts in the ecosystem of the European market. Thirdly, and certainly not lastly, the European Commission proposed roughly 10 days ago the Interoperable Europe Act, so a framework by which the European Commission aims at offering interoperability at a broader scale from between member states, not only to generate greater services for citizens, but also generating greater savings. So huge developments over the last year, and I'm incredibly happy that we have today very distinguished panelists from throughout the European continent that will help us discuss all of these issues in great detail. The 3 hours that we have today together will be articulated in 3 parts. We will start our event with a keynote speech that will set up the scene and the lay of the land. We will then transition to the first panel, which will look specifically at the topics of data sovereignty, certification schemes, and how to extract value out of data in the public sector. The second and last panel will look in the very specific topic of interoperability, and will zoom into the provision proposed by the Commission in the Data Act about mandatory cloud switching. So, with no further ado, I would like to welcome on the stage our keynote speaker today. We're delighted to have with us Biljana Weber, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Northern Western Europe at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Biljana, thank you so much for being with us. HP is the Silicon Valley founder and have been accompanying European customers, governments, and enabling the European ecosystem for over 80 years. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Irina, and good morning, everybody. Good morning from grey Vienna today. I'm really delighted and excited to be here with you and greet all of the participants and distinguished panelists that are going to tackle one of the most important topics that we are thinking about these days, and it is about digital transformation and data modernization in the public sector. Why this is important? I think the governments are working in unprecedented, challenging times. When you just think about post-pandemic economical recovery that we need to drive, the safety and security of our citizens that is top of mind of everybody these days, energy crisis, climate crisis, aging population of Europe. There are a number of the challenges the governments are facing today. And digital technologies are transforming the way we interact, the way we live, and the way we work. And what the governments are doing in order to leverage these technologies to provide the best possible services to the citizens is top of mind of each and every public sector employee as well as citizen in any of the countries that I am working with or talking to. I would like to share with you a few thoughts, what we believe are underpinning trends in technology that are helping governments in their thinking about digital transformation and data modernization. First topic I want to address is a challenge that is in Europe standing for a number of years, and it is about making digital accessible to all. We are very much aware of the digital gap that we see in Europe. And the gap is coming from accessibility to digital content as well as to creating the content and consuming the content. And we are talking about the different groups of our citizens that do not have possibility to access or create digital content. And this would be low-income households, elderly generation in our countries, as well as children. And pandemic has shown us the importance of digital inclusion. If we just think about the transformation education system had to go through by providing the content and making it accessible to all the children to go through the education at the times of the lockdowns. And many of the families have really struggled through that, being because of an ability to have devices to access the content, but even more because of the lack of connectivity. Recent research has shown that only 37% of the households in rural areas have access to the high-speed internet. And this is an area where many of the governments are focusing on to improve, because by improving connectivity, it's a first step to improve the way we live and work in any region in Europe. Second type of the citizens that are very much impacted by this digital gap are elderly citizens. Think about a person that has problems with their mobility and lives in a rural area, how that person can have an access to the physicians. And here is where technology can play a significant role, because we have seen a tremendous innovation taking place in the healthcare where IoT connected devices can provide a better access to many people to the great healthcare, can provide also a better data points for physicians and physiotherapists to take a quicker and more informed decision about the future treatment of the patients. And if IoT devices are installed in the homes of the elderly people, it can trigger automatic appointment with a doctor in a case we see the signals of the deterioration of the health status of the patients. All of this can really improve the lives of many citizens in Europe. Second element in technology or trend in technology I want to mention is anticipating and meeting the needs of each and every citizens. We have seen the explosion of mobile devices. Currently, 77% of European citizens own a smart device, be it a phone or a tablet. It is even higher penetration within the younger generation. For example, in France, generation between 15 and 29 years old, 94% of them are owning a smart device. What does it mean is that there are certain expectations about the creation, consumption, and access to the digital content. We have seen the evolution in the entertainment industry. We have seen how banking industry and retail industry have really understood this trend and made it possible to have a fantastic customer experience by using the content in banking or accessing the services in banking and retail space. Now these same users are also citizens of the government, and they expect exactly the same user and a customer experience when they access the content provided by the governments or use the services. And recent research from Accenture, just released a month ago, shows that 53% of European citizens are not satisfied with the services they are getting, digital services from their governments. People don't want anymore to wait long in line to do their tax filing or wait long online to get somebody pick up the phone and answer their inquiry. So it is on top of mind in all the governments how to provide top-notch digital experience for every citizen. And very often Estonia is called out as the best practice. They started almost 2 decades ago with the principle of once and only. So only once the citizens are providing in a digital form the data that any agency that the citizens is interacting with can use. And therefore, the citizen does not need to re-enter the same data over and over again. Recently, also, Danish government has introduced a principle that they are serving automatically and proactively the citizens based on different events in their life. For example, if the young parents are getting a newborn child, a new family member, automatically the system is triggering a parental support that these families going to get without a need to fill in a lot of forms. So having this in mind in every government about what the citizens are now expecting when it comes to their digital experiences is going to really shape the way how the governments are thinking about what to do next in their digital transformation. Third, very important trend is unlocking the power of data sharing. And pandemic was the great experience for all of us to learn how important it is to be able to share the data in order to accelerate innovation and results in research and development. And we have seen that we have many obstacles, and the obstacles are sometimes of the nature of data protection in the sense of legislations and rules of regulations, but also in a sense of technologies being able to communicate to each other. And the third element is how this data is structured. We have seen that there is a huge portion of data coming from the healthcare. 30% of all data produced daily worldwide is coming from the healthcare. But this data is unstructured, meaning they're not readable to any AI algorithm. So there is a lot of work to be done in making data interoperable, making sure that we have a structured data that can be leveraged for the good cause of research, development, and innovation. And I'm so delighted to see that one of the key speakers today on the event is also a CEO of Gaia X that is playing an important role, not only in Europe, but also in the worldwide, on creating a new level of standards of interoperability and ability to exchange and work on the data sets. There is another important element and trend in the IT that is also shaping the government's agendas, and it is the building walls against cybercrimes. We have seen lately an increased amount of the cyber attacks across the world, and they are very often targeting government agencies. And it is the cyber attacks as well as the ransomware requests that are coming. And the governments are becoming increasingly aware of the need to build a very strong cyber walls around the data and around the applications they are using. And recent IDC data shows that in European Union, 11.9% of all the investments, IT investments in the public sector is really going around how to increase the defense and how to improve the security of the IT systems. And we are all thinking about the world of the zero trust policy or zero trust security, where there will be an architecture in the IT that is taking the cybersecurity into all levels, from every application, from edge to cloud, from all the environments to all the softwares to all the servers that every customer is having. And here we believe that as HPE, we are playing a very important role to many of the governments in really defining this architecture and providing services as well as cloud and edge solutions that are going according to the zero trust security standards. I'm very excited about the opportunity ahead of us, and I believe that next decade is going to be very important in defining the digital transformation strategy for many of the customers. Recent research is showing that 63% of the governments do not have yet defined a cloud strategy. And it is very important to choose the right partner when any government is thinking about a cloud strategy. It's not one strategy. There has to be a thinking about what kind of applications and services are going to be in a public cloud, which are going to be hosted in a private cloud. Is the government going to choose multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud strategy? And these strategic decisions are going to take place as we speak, and finding the right partners is very important. And we are very proud to be a partner for many decades to all the governments in the European Union, sharing a common vision, and it is to provide a sustainable environment for every person and every organization to grow and advance in European Union. I wish you a wonderful conversations today, and I hope we will inspire you to think about how to modernize your government based on a digital transformation and data modernization concepts. Thank you very much. Back to you, Irena.
Thank you so much, Biljana, and thank you for offering such a comprehensive overview of the trends that are really determining the evolution of the public sector in this topical moment. As you're saying, accessibility is actually a very basic concept, but an incredibly important one, especially now that we are thinking about offering a digital government by default. Citizen expectations, and we have the Commissioner Hans cabinet today that will comment precisely on this point and how the European Interoperable Europe Act will try to address this kind of expectations. And certainly, last but not least, the incredibly important point about the unlocking the power of data that can be only made in case the data is being shared. Thank you again so much, Biljana, for the very comprehensive overview and for being with us. And we will now transition to the first panel to really start unpacking some of these aspects that Biljana has just raised. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage the panelists, starting with Andreas Mitrakas. Andreas is the head of unit market certification and standardization at ENISA. Thank you so much, Andreas, for being with us today.
Thank you.
We have Nassima Ovre, Director of Strategy and Marketing for Trusted Cloud Solutions at Orange. Welcome, Nassima.
Good morning.
And last but certainly not least, we have Vincenzo Fortunato, Program Manager of the Interoperability and Data Sector of the Department for Digital Transformation at the Presidency of Council of Ministers in Italy. Thank you, Vincenzo, for being with us.
Good morning.
So the topic of this first panel, as we announced initially, data sovereignty in public sector, how to build trust, how to build assurance, and what is then, how does the cloud certification schemes that are being developed, how they will play in the market, and how will the market basically be reshaped, if I may say so, by the upcoming legislation. So, but maybe to start setting the scene, I would first like to start zooming at the data in public sector specifically, because clearly there is a big body of legislation that the European Commission is driving on that pertains certainly private sector, interaction between private and public sector data. And then we have obviously the specificities of the public sector data. And so, Vincenzo, I would love to start with you. And obviously, we know that the Italian government just took office. So understandably, there will be a reassessment of all the political initiatives that were on the table. But nonetheless, what you can share with us today, I would love to hear from you. Why is data in public sector so peculiar? Why would this be having specificities, and how is the Italian government at least considering to address these specificities?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. The rise of data and digital technologies are rapidly transforming economies and societies. This is happening in Italy as well, with enormous implications for governments' daily operations. 21st century governments must keep pace with the growing expectations of their citizens, manage increasing pressure on their budgets, and react to new policy challenges. Any failure to adapt to this new and changing environment could expose them to damaging risks and a consequent diminishing of public trust. As a premise to all of this, since I will address this later, in Italy, several initiatives aim at ensuring the full interoperability of key datasets and services across central and local public administration, as well as to enable the harmonization with other EU countries of the service procedures prioritized by the Single Digital Gateway Directive. In particular, a national digital data platform will guarantee the interoperability of datasets through a catalog of application programming interfaces shared across central and local administrations. This will enable the fulfillment of the once-only principle, the automatic exposure by the source database of citizens and enterprises key data attributes, automatically and constantly refreshed over time, for the benefit of all requesting processes, services of the public administration. A national data strategy will be able to improve the coherence and effectiveness of the various initiatives both for the public administration and for the private sector. Data governance elements are often in place as part of a broader digital transformation policies. However, these components can be fragmented, thus reducing their wall of government value in terms of public sector integration and cohesion. Holistic data governance can help us to join up government as a whole. This disconnection is deeply rooted in the intricate governance arrangements supporting those policies, e.g., different public sector organizations leading these policies, or lack of clarity in terms of leadership and responsibilities, therefore posing important barriers for data integration and sharing. A holistic data governance can also help in enabling government as a platform, one of the key dimensions of the digital government. For instance, especially here in Italy, the development of common but flexible data tools, e.g. data sharing platform or enablers, provide solutions that can be reused across the broad public sector. At a more technical level, fragmentation also results from legacy challenges in terms of how an organization generates and controls the data and the impossibility of sharing and accessing those data in light of specific legal arrangements, leading to siloed policies and technical solutions which add up to the impossibility of building an integrated and connected government.
Great, and thank you for that. So I think just a few points I would really like to come back on. So as you are explaining us, holistic data governance is governance is critical, and basically what the Italian government is really trying to establish is a government as a platform, which is really going back to Biljana's speech before. While we think, and consider that the future will be digital, including the government will be digital by default, and offer to the citizens, even more important to equip our citizens to be able to really leverage out of it. So once only principle, digital by default, obviously the big trust and assurance question comes to mind. And this is, I guess, Andreas, where your work is really coming hugely into play. Maybe to set the scene of what you're leading on at ENISA, maybe a good place to start would be really to explain to our audience what are the objectives of the cloud certification schemes that you're leading on, because obviously the Cybersecurity Act was mandating ENISA to offer schemes on a broad range of ICT services. So I would equally be curious to maybe ask you if you could share some thoughts on why did you decide to start with cloud as a first? What are your objectives? Because this debate, obviously, on cloud certification schemes is, I think it's fair to say, highly contentious and highly debated. But maybe it would be helpful to hear what are the objectives that primarily you want to achieve, and maybe what are the stages of the process when this scheme is gonna come into play. Over to you, Andreas.
All right. Good morning, Irene, and many thanks for the invite to ENISA. On the background, we can recall that the cloud scheme was requested by the Commission using the legal basis of the regulation for the free flow of non-personal data. That was a legal instrument that was adopted in 2018, and the request reached ENISA in late 2019. But then we had this earth-shattering event, which was the pandemic, that brought pretty much everyone and their uncle online, basically, be it through an e-connection, M connection, but I mean, both public and private services saw an influx of users all of a sudden. I suppose that it would be incoherent if one overlooked this event, this new element, and sought to interpret public interest with the notions that pre-existed COVID. Up to then, the growth was linear, the growth was predictable, was expected, but nobody saw what came as a result of the pandemic. When with the lockdowns, everybody went online. So I suppose that this new prism gives us the ability to interpret the broadening scope of the cloud scheme, which effectively seeks to invoke public interest in an area which is primarily, almost exclusively, composed by private service provision. I mean, pretty much everything on our online internet infrastructure is private based, it's private held, it's private managed, and there's only ILETs, small portions of that infrastructure that actually belong to the states. Still, we have to invoke rights, we have to exercise our rights as citizens, consumers, or in the capacity that we act. Of course, the government, in broad sense, has the duty to defend these rights so that they're duly exercised by the citizens. So the goal, of course, of a scheme like of any other cybersecurity scheme is to put together appropriate security measures concerning the cloud. It, in addition, has also acquired the objective to assist in the implementation of the regulation on personal data. And this is a dynamic objective that came along the way. And of course, more recently, the certain degree of provisioning for the purpose of sovereignty has also been added. And perhaps it's this final element that has led to some perception that could be even called controversial at times about the actual objective of the scheme. But the scheme as such, let's not make any mistake, is about it's about cybersecurity. Now you also asked me about the timeline. I should not forget. I think already I mentioned that the technical kickoff was in the end of 2019, and I think we started with the ad hoc working group on the 5th of March 2020, right at the crack of the pandemic and the lockdowns. But we are looking into early next year for discussion with the member states and the Commission at the CCG level, which is the governing body for cybersecurity certification in the EU.
Great, thank you, Andreas. And maybe could you just walk us through a little bit of the content, for what you can share understandably at this stage in terms of data classification, and how roughly will this look like?
To begin with, there's nothing that is really hidden here, and anybody can just look up the scheme on an earlier version, of course, on the site of ENISA. Also, in about 2 years ago, we had also a consultation, a public consultation, where we invited the broader public to share their views on the then version of the scheme. That has all gone very well, and lots of good suggestions have found their way into the security requirements. In addition, and with a view to broaden the footprint and the impact of the scheme, ENISA took the initiative to reach out to one of the European standards organizations, CEN, that accepted the task to work on a European standard concerning security controls for the cloud. I suppose that this puts ENISA into a more a neutral, more comfortable position, if you like, because a portion of the more involving discussions could be held at the standardization forum. It's more befit to their role, whereas ENISA can then look into compiling and adjusting the various components more effectively. But again, it also gives more stakeholders the ability to join these discussions, whereas with the ad hoc working group selection procedures, they might felt that they did not respond timely, or they were not selected, or simply we cannot accommodate everyone who has an interest in it. So I think this draws an outline of process and slight content considerations.
That's very helpful, and maybe Nassima, coming to you, and obviously you're bringing to this table today a very peculiar perspective, because you spent a big part of your career in the public sector as the advisor on innovation topics to the French Minister of Defense before you took your current role in Orange. So maybe again, just to help our audience understand the unique perspective that you can bring, since Orange is mostly known as a telco vendor, would you mind just telling us a little bit more? What are you doing as a company in the cybersecurity space before then we go into the topic of sovereignty and maybe a comment on the cloud certification scheme driven by ENISA?
Yeah, so good morning from Paris, and thank you from Europe and HPE for your invitation. First of all, I would like to apologize in advance because I caught a cold, so I could talk with a stuffy nose. I hope I would be understandable. So as you said, Irena, Orange is above all known as one of the world's leading telecommunication operators. To give you an example, we operate end-to-end connectivity services in more than 220 countries and territories. And we are owning 45,000 kilometers of submarine cables. So since the main topic of this panel is the resilience, anyone can imagine the strong challenges Orange has to fulfill anytime to secure its complex infrastructures. But telco is not the unique activity, and we have a brand called Orange Business Services dedicated to B2B and providing global IT in addition to telecommunication services for companies and for the public sector. So from connectivity, IoT, cloud to AI and cybersecurity, we support organizations at every stage of their data transformation, keeping in mind a key challenge, which is to be able to provide tools and guarantees for the end user to keep control over its data anytime. To give you a concrete example, we currently support several governmental institutes, non-governmental organizations, and ministries of foreign affairs networks across the world, including Europe. And the challenges for today's foreign affairs departments are immense, because we need to be able to adapt and respond with agility in an environment where more data is being shared across network, and cyber attack is a constant threat. So we work for a federal public service of foreign affairs to transform its global communications infrastructures, including network, security, applications infrastructures across hundreds of locations. And to do that, additional network resilience is supported through fully integrated satellite services. So you can see that we have a huge activity. Concerning cybersecurity, we can rely on Orange Cyber Defense, which is the expert cybersecurity business unit of the Orange Group, providing a wide range of consulting, products, implementation services to help organizations around the world to ensure, for example, compliance with regulations, to reduce business risk through effective threat detection and response, And to do that, we have several security operation centers all over the world to secure digital assets, to master also the complexity of multi-cloud security. And if you don't mind, I would like to grab the opportunity to share with you the results of a recent study. Every year, Orange Cyber Defense share its annual security research report called the Security Navigator. And I would like to share with you the major outcomes of this study, which have been launched last week. So first of all, there is a clear shift in the geographical location of cyber extortion victims. From 2021 to 2022, there is a decrease observed in the number of victims from North America, offset by an increase in Europe and East Asia. This is the first conclusion. Secondly, SMEs, manufacturing, and the public sector are particularly exposed. To give you some figures, public administration deal mostly with incidents attributed to internal origins for 66%. And we can also see and notice that public sector contributes the fifth highest portion of incidents OCD cyber SOCs deal with. So what I just said is not a scoop, but it is a concrete illustration on the fact that public sector is a high-value target for criminals, for cyber criminals. And obviously, it is important to go on educating employees on cyber threats, improving assets resilience. And to do that, I would like to insist on the fact that cybersecurity is an issue for everybody, and the collaboration between public, academic, and private ecosystems is crucial. And I say that because I had the chance to work on public sector and now in a private company, and I can see that creating this ecosystem is very important.
Thank you so much. And indeed, on the topic of the collaboration between public and private sector, we'll debate also in great detail in the second panel. And thank you as well for highlighting the outcomes of your recent survey. So obviously, cyber attacks and overall assurance, it's fundamental for public sector, also from a value perspective, from a trust perspective. So now ENISA is basically introducing the categorization of data into three categories in a similar fashion that a number of governments across the European continent are doing. So basic, standard, and high. And then with each of the categories of data, there are specific requirements that the vendors must fulfill to be able to actually handle, for example, the high sensitivity data in particular. And there has been lots of debate in European circles and in European across European governments on whether or not the proposed criteria on the high sensitivity data are right or not, or will be they effective or not. And maybe I would stay with you, Nassima, to ask for your opinion, because there was a lot of debate on this topic specifically from non-European vendors, but you are a large European vendor and you're also on the board of ETNO. So I was curious whether you could share some of your thoughts on the current proposal that is on the table.
Yeah, as you said, Orange is active in several European initiatives such as ETNO, Gaia-X, just to name a few, because we consider that digital sovereignty should be addressed at European level. This is the first point. To answer this question, I will start by saying that quantifying the sovereignty with metrics is not always a simple task. So cybersecurity certification schemes can provide a helpful toolset, among others, for establishing trust. So in other words, it is a way to demonstrate that a product or a service meet a standard and can offer benefits for the user, especially when this certification process provides, I would say, transparency about the technology under review. Orange Business Services provides several solutions of cloud. We address thousands of customers in Europe, all over the world, sorry, with different trust criteria. So it is interesting to consider that entities that provide cloud services should not be required to pursue multiple cybersecurity certifications for the same product, processes, or services. So there is clearly an interest. And to have a harmonized certification framework for cloud in Europe can be interesting because it could contribute to operate across the EU on a larger scale and consequently to improve competition and innovation. In addition to that, there is a challenge concerning the cybersecurity maturity of the ecosystem at European scale. And I would say that from a very global perspective, cybersecurity certification can be a way to improve cyber resilience since it is built on the best practices in cybersecurity. So we can see that there is a lot of benefits. We also consider that it should be addressed at expert level, where industry and government work together towards technological solutions in order to find the best guarantees in terms of data protection. And last but not least, it is important to underline the importance of freedom of choice, as well as for the user, as for the cloud service providers, with regard to their level of maturity and to the sensitivity of data they are dealing with.
Great, thank you for that. So transparency is key. So standardization, the ENISA cybersecurity scheme as a standardized scheme that will basically drive efficiencies also from a standardization perspective in the European market, and a great tool, I understand, to improve the cybersecurity maturity of products and services in the European Union. And I guess, Andreas, this goes back to your previous point, that obviously the scheme has a core around cybersecurity, and then there is an assurance piece that is probably, I understand, a very minor piece of the whole proposal, but possibly the most debated one. So we heard a lot now about this concept, and maybe I would come back to you, Vincenzo, to go back to the management of data and how governments are deciding about the best data strategies, because ENISA is now standardizing what is already present in a number of European government cloud government policies, in certifying, basically categorizing data based on its sensitivity. Could you tell us a bit more about the reflections of the current Italian government in this space, and who is going to manage the data of public sector, if you're going to centralize this approach, etc.?
Sure. I will like to go back a little bit to the fundamental concepts, in the sense that we are used to talk about technologies normally, as we are most often also here in Italy come from that sector. So we normally have the habit to focus on technologies. But the reflection here in Italy as of today is this one. As a result of the availability that we still have of immense amounts of data, for example, of citizens and businesses, Now, the primary objective of the public administration here is now designing digital services to exploit this availability and remove the barriers that I mentioned previously that still exist for users to have a guaranteed access. This I want to focus especially the sense that we have to guarantee access not only to information but to services, modern services. And today, what's a modern service? It's an integrated service between or among different administrations that must interoperate in real time and with the value of certifying the attributes of individuals, whether they are natural or legal persons. This is a very fundamental and important concept since brings us to the concept of trust. You previously mentioned how we can trust in a digital world transactions and data transfers also across the borders. This is a very important concept that I want to stress. We are observing a phenomena here in Italy. I would call it a new economy of qualified attributes, if I can use this expression. This is a technical expression that you can find in several digital projects that we are managing here in Italy, but also in Europe. Since these are rules, these attributes are rules, and this new economy is emerging around us. This is made up of information that has a very high value for individuals and organizations. And what this economy gives us, this provides us the evidence that is needed by those who deliver digital services to trust their users. This is another basic concept that is a very fundamental one as well, since governments that have implemented a strategic approach for the use of data throughout the public sector are better able to anticipate societal trends and needs also as well of population, for example, and consequently develop more effective long-term plans. Additionally, the active use of data plays an important role in the ongoing design and delivery of public services and efforts to analyze and evaluate all types of government activity to allow for continuous improvement. It also offers transparency about success or failure in ways that support accountability and stimulate public engagement and trust. I can understand that this general concept can be seen as not having a direct impact on selecting and choices technologies, but I would like to put this concept at the base of the choices of each government in Europe. Trust, capability of being transparent, and using the resources that we already have, data, we already have these resources. So not using them is a really big mistake. So technology today must help organizations and the public sector especially to exploit this richness. Otherwise, we will lose our objectives.
That's great. No, thank you for these thoughts. There was a lot of very interesting pointers there. I think one of the very important things that you highlighted is interoperability of public sector services within the country and then with other countries. And this internal interoperability and then cross member states interoperability, again, it's something that we will come back also in the second panel because it's so critical to achieve exactly what you're highlighting, extract the insights and value, which can be obviously monetary value, out of the data, immense volumes of data that the government is already generating and possessing. So I think it's very, very reassuring to see that this is so high on the governmental agendas. And this might be a good segue to the next theme I wanted to actually raise. So huge amounts of data, extract value, offer more services to citizens. Again, question of trust. Now, one of the ways that this current European Commission was adopting to generate, let's say, this needed trust is indeed data sovereignty, which in turn some stakeholders understand as being something that we can achieve through data localization. So there is this concept that if data is locally hosted within a specific member state or within the European Union, it kind of hits the mark of data sovereignty, which hits the mark of the trust that is so much needed. So maybe, Andreas, starting with you, could you maybe share the ENISA's perspective on data localization and in the context of cloud services, obviously in particular? And how do you see that data localization would actually generate benefits and more assurances for European stakeholders?
Indeed, thank you, Irena. Data localization is neither a new concept nor an exclusive one to the EU. If you browse across the practices and policy priorities around the globe, one can come across several jurisdictions, countries, whatever, that verge or scratch the surface of data localization. Now, what could be the motivation? Possibly one could think of a more assertive role of the state on the internet, but I wonder if that is the primary concern. I should think that compliance is a strong driver. Specific requirements for particular application areas or industries, take banking laws, for instance, or the processing of personal data as we perceive it here in the EU. And perhaps also what I mentioned before about the pandemic, the pool of data has become far, far larger as compared to what we had 3 or 5 years ago. Therefore, why not share the pie more or distribute the pieces more equitably and seek to leave a value portion of it within the state where the data is generated, or the jurisdiction, not just the country. So I think that with this mix of legal/compliance, but also business reasoning, data localization is put under a more neutral light, and we don't need to see it as, oh my God, we're service providers. What's going to happen if the data owners want to keep it all for themselves? That's not the point. So that's something to keep in mind. Then we need also to take a look at the interest of the state in particular areas like critical infrastructure. There are strong drivers to keep data close to one's chest. We see what happens with the situation in Ukraine, the war, and the cyber risks that have emerged, and in many ways they took over the political agenda, causing a new set of issues to solve in a difficult period. So indeed, we have this mix of business. I mean, the data localization is defined by the governments. You see that there's a strong drive thereof. I listened to what Nassima suggested, and I recalled also that the French defense strategy that was recently mentioned by President Macron also included sovereignty, which is a variant, another way to talk about data localization, as a priority for Europe, not just for a member state, a large member state like France. So I think this cannot be unnoticed or unseen, and we really need to find ways to accommodate the notion of data localization in the EU. Service providers, have they been responding? Very much so. I mean, we have particular and multiple application areas where you have dedicated data centers that are built, purposely made in an EU member state or several of them across the board in organized regions. There's a significant investment going on. This is very positive because indeed that suggests that there is a business opportunity there that can be taken up at the appropriate level.
Great. Thank you so much for this. So I think a very important concept that you highlighted, keep value where the data is generated. So as a kind of fil rouge of where, of the driver of the data localization trend. And as you said, I think it is a fact that the data localization requirements that, again, to your point, are a phenomenon that is, we can observe well beyond Europe. It's practically redesigning the cloud markets and also redesigning the role of the local cloud service providers. And I have a follow-up question on this that I'll come to in a second, but maybe I'll turn to you, Nassima, just to comment from your perspective, because again, Orange being a European, or Orange rather, being a European player, how do you see data localization and what is the Orange answer to it?
Okay, so what we can see is first, digital trust is being more and more emerging as a required component of cloud computing for more and more public and private entities. And this dynamic has been accelerated in the context of the COVID pandemic, of the geopolitical instability, but also of the awareness on data value. What we can see is that we have to deal with two imperatives, which are, on the one hand, the necessity to benefit from the innovation driven by cloud, because it is what everybody is looking for, and data sovereignty. So having said that, we consider that the notions of trust can cover different aspects which are not only limited to data location. There are several challenges. For example, the need to maintain operational autonomy in the event of a crisis, whether economic, geopolitical, or even health related. This is the first point. The second one implies guaranteeing respect for the confidentiality of data and activities. In some cases, there is the desire to strengthen technological independence. And last but not least, there is also the challenge to be compliant with regulatory schemes. So I would say that data allocation is important. It is also important for an economic point of view, but it's not the only, the unique criteria we have to fulfill.
Great, that's very helpful. And do you have, provided that data localization is not the only, let's say, factor generating trust, but do you have in your offering also, I assume, products that are addressing, to Andrea's previous point, that the market is responding to redesigning itself and its product services portfolio in a way to be compliant?
Yeah. So as I said previously, Orange Business Services is supporting thousands of public and private entities all over the world, and we clearly see that the expectations in terms of sovereignty are not the same from a country to another, from an organization to another. So our commitment is, I would say, to provide strong guarantees on customers' data, applications, services hosted in our cloud by considering the context and the needs of the customer with regard to the level of criticality of their data. And these criteria are different from a customer to another. Anyway, whatever the needs, I think important to insist on the fact that our commitment is to provide secured, resilient, and regulation compliant services. So these values are at the core of our cloud solutions and services. Then, as a European IT-based company, we know that our customers rely on us because we have the ability to mobilize our partners like HPE, technologies, but also skills to meet their needs and to help them to find this best balance between trust and innovation. So if I had to give you an example, we have a private and public cloud solution called Cloud Avenue. This solution is fully operated and managed by Orange Business Services. It is secured by our Orange Cyber Defense experts. It is compliant with the highest security standards, also compliant with the applicable regulatory requirements such as the GDPR. And there is a high level of resilience with dual room infrastructures, with data centers located in different areas in France. And in addition to these guarantees, we want to develop the approach which could be summarized as never trust, always verify with HPE, since Cloud Avenue is composed of some HPE technologies for storage and compute. And the idea is based on the fact that the cyberspace is composed of several layers. You have the physical layer, the application layer, the cognitive layer. If we have a zoom on the physical layer, there are a lot of devices that are interconnected, sensors, transmitters, servers, chipsets, and so on. And currently, we have an ongoing work with HP to see how to provide to the customer the tool set to master data, considering that each component should be measured, verified to establish its trustworthiness. So it is an example among others, but clearly we have this solution, Cloud Avenue, that can fulfill strong requirements to provide trust on data.
Great, thank you. And I guess one very important point that you highlighted is data sovereignty is basically has no legal definition as such, and the expectations of what various stakeholders understand as data sovereignty may also slightly vary in different European member states. And I don't know, Vincenzo, if you want to spend a few words on the position maybe of, or the understanding or the ongoing discussions in Italy on this topic.
Yes, I will be very straight to this. We have to solve this apparent paradox about talking about data localization and the cloud concept, no? It's a paradox. I think we are talking about a paradox. We have technologies that are able to provide these kind of solutions in a transparent way. I ask myself sometimes if I know what kind of electricity I'm consuming today, if it's coming from my country, my own country, or it's coming from abroad. I don't know actually, but I use it. This is exactly where we are now discussing about these concepts, in the sense that we have before then this understand that we have to put the data-driven public sector approach at the center of our discussions, maybe I suggest my colleagues sometimes that we have to stop a while and to understand what are the main objectives, the important objectives that we have to reach. We have to think about on how we deliver digital services to citizens and enterprises today. Obviously, we have to protect data and digital infrastructures as we do protect physical infrastructures all over the world. But sometimes we lose ourselves in talking about if and how I must physically possess a data set or the keys, the digital keys that I use for cloud technology, for example. I don't think this is the main focus about which we have to deal with today. What we have as a duty in terms of public sector to re-put this approach at the center of the table, since we have to ensure that also the open government data and internal government data are important to be shared with our citizens. I leave the solutions to the technology and to the innovation, as it may appear evident. So I don't want to focus on how technology does this, delivers this. What I have in mind is that my final user is the citizen as of today. So sometimes we have to refocus the discussion. And what I'm asking normally when I deal with this kind of conversation is, let's solve this paradox once for always. The paradox is localization and data and cloud technologies. If anyone is able to solve this paradox, please, I'm happy to hear.
Great, thank you, Vincenzo. I will just take one question from the audience, and I should have said it before, that you are free to put your questions in the chat function, and we'll do our best to address them. And we have two that came in. The first question is from Michal Marek, Chief Specialist at the MOH in Poland, who says, quote, do you also include issues concerning international cybersecurity, not only academic and public environment? I don't know if anyone from the panel wants to comment on this question.
I can start if you want, because in my introduction I did with the necessity to have a collaboration between public, academic, and private sector. So to answer to Michael Marek, absolutely. As I said, concerning Orange Cyber Defense has different SOCs all over the world. And thanks to these SOCs, it is possible to make real-time threat intelligence in order to detect and analyze events through data analytics, and then to identify some countermeasures and to trigger corrective actions that can be re-injected in our data protection solutions. So we can see that it's a kind of circle where we can analyze the threats and to see what kind of countermeasures we can re-inject in our solutions. And this is possible thanks to all the information we can collect all over the world.
Great, thank you for that. And we do have, unless there are any other comments on this question, we do have a second question that I don't think will be best placed in the second panel. I'll just confirm Thomas Jorgensen, Senior Policy Coordinator at the European University Association, that we did receive your question on, quote, for citizens, How do you see the plans in eIDAS for a European digital wallet? Will this be a small step or a qualitative change? So unless anyone in the panel would have any comment, I would spare this question for panel number 2, because we will have Maximilian Strothmann from the Cabinet of Commissioner Hahn that is actually looking at these topics. So maybe going to our next theme that I wanted to raise today, it's how do these cybersecurity schemes actually land in practice? And as I said at the outset, introducing the panel, and again, we heard from Andreas already a lot of readjustments in the market are taking place to be compliant. But I would like maybe to spend some time now looking specifically at the European, smaller European cloud service providers, and how are they reacting to basically the scheme that is in the making. Why is that? Because if I am a smaller cloud vendor, to be compliant with the upcoming cybersecurity scheme, I will fundamentally, and I'm slightly simplifying, but fundamentally I'll need 2 types of skills, in-house or I'll need to outsource. First of all, I'll have to classify my core business along the 3 levels of data sensitivity, if I may say so, that are foreseen in the ENISA Cloud Security Scheme. Secondly, once I understand at what level I need to be certified, I obviously need legal advisory services to be able to, do all the needful to be compliant. And obviously, it may not be a given from a skills perspective and from a financial perspective. And so my question maybe to you, Andreas, is have you already started thinking about this aspect, and are there any measures that maybe ENISA is being considering on how to make sure that basically the majority of the European market will be, accompanied in this certification process?
Thank you, Ray. It's such a good question that I did not have a prefixed reply for you, but I'll give you some guiding elements there, some stepping stones, and you'll I think the audience can figure the response. To begin with, we know from the regulation that we have, as you suggested, 3 assurance levels: basic, substantial, and high. And you put it very nicely that indeed whoever seeks to be certified, they need to firstly understand what exactly they're doing and how the compliance with the scheme mitigates the risks as risk owners. Now, ENISA on the background has developed a purpose-made methodology to bring together threat information, risk assessment methodologies for the purpose of assigning an assurance level to a specific business model. And this is a methodology that works equally well for public authorities, that they would like to do it for their own public policy purposes, as well as service providers or users of cloud certification. Now, we have made this methodology available. It's on the website. It's called, if anyone searches for SCSA risk assessment or risk assessment methodology, they can come across it. But we took also an additional step to broaden the scope, and we turned against to our trusted European Standards Organization, CEN. Again, in JTC 13, they accepted to take a look and do 2 things. Firstly, condense and simplify, and then customize for different application areas. So we can use as a reference model the methodology that ENISA produced and come up with a European standard that is probably the first example of purpose-made risk assessment for European certification. Not just for the cloud, but for any other area that will come along. Now, ENISA also works with other organizations on the background, with 3GPP and the GSMA. Currently, it does not impact cloud as such. We do it for 5G purpose, for ETSI, very importantly. But I think that with time, we will see that we would need to consider aspects of cloud also for the 5G area. Now, you mentioned that it might be a cost or an investment rather to move into certification. Indeed, it is the case. The scheme in its draft form has been heavily impacted at the substantial level by the second cloud scheme, which is applicable in France, and for assurance level high by the requirements of the C5 scheme, which is applicable in Germany, meaning that whoever has already experienced or they've already acquired certification according to these schemes, they would not have a hard time to find their way through the maze of the European scheme and become compliant. What we can notice also is that the European the draft candidate scheme, EUCS, is slightly more elaborate, and it has over 500 controls currently available. So this is just a numeric indication to demonstrate the thoroughness that the experts have put into it. It's not a deterrent as such. Last point, alongside ENISA, I think we need to highlight the role of the European Cybersecurity Competence Center, which is a recently founded agency with its seat in Bucharest, in Romania. It is very important because it is the facilitator in this area, both for innovation and as well as for research. But I also understand that aspects of implementation could also come under the funding opportunities that the Competence Center is making available to the stakeholders. So I think they're currently running calls. And while the transition to certification probably is not right now in the scope, several other aspects of cybersecurity are, including ISACs or initiatives that concern communities of stakeholders, networks of stakeholders. You have a lot of experience in HP with the networks of your users for cloud services. So indeed, it's an interesting opportunity to explore.
Great, thank you. And indeed, one of the purposes of this conference is to be informative. So indeed, elements like the risk assessment methodology is really something I would love to really highlight and publicize as much as possible, because this could be actually a very helpful tool, to the local cloud service providers. And also very interesting to hear about the recent establishment of the European Cybersecurity Competence Center in Bucharest. So thank you for highlighting both aspects. And maybe, Nassima, any comments from your perspective on the interplay of the local cloud service providers? Any thoughts you would like to add from your perspective?
You want to say concerning the different schemes which
yes,
are ongoing?
Right, and the local cloud service providers, I assume you're also partnering in the market. So any particular, feedback? What do you see? How are they reacting? So what do you see in the market, basically?
We just can. What I can say is that there is a kind of awareness about the importance of data protection, about the importance of this kind of schemes, which, as I said previously, can provide such KPI, such standards in order to assess the solutions. We can also see that more and more customers are willing to understand how we can provide these KPIs. And that's it.
Sounds good. I think the awareness piece, and probably coming back to this European Cybersecurity Awareness Center, will be fundamental to make sure that that the markets, again, that may not have the in-house skills, will be actually up to speed and be able to operate in a compliant fashion in a rapid time. Maybe, and I'm conscious we're driving towards the end of this panel, and there are a few more final questions, and maybe one final theme I wanted to address with all of you. So again, we have in these public sector conferences, typically, we want to present how different governments, different member states are approaching the same issue. And maybe again, coming to you, Vincenzo, the Italian government have been considering for a while the establishment of, let's say, an entity that would centralize the provisioning of services into public administrations, called Polo Strategico Nazionale. Again, totally conscious that the new government took office recently, but I was wondering whether, just conceptually you could share with our international audience today, what is the thinking of the approach and what is the current debate around this?
Sure. We have an important European resilience plan-based project about this. The Polo Strategico Nazionale, it's a national strategic hub, and it is projected to be a highly reliable infrastructure, which has the objective, in line with the Italian cloud strategy and with the National Recovery and Resilience Plan I was mentioning, to provide the public administration with cloud technologies and infrastructures that can benefit from the highest guarantees of reliability, resilience, and independence. As you may notice, I'm asking the innovation and the technology providers to give us the benefit of these developments. I'm not making technical choices in such a way that this national hub will allow us to securely host the critical and strategic data and services of the Italian administrations. So it's a very high-level objectives project, this one. And obviously, the distinction between types of data and services takes place on the basis of the classification path defined by the National Cybersecurity Agency and by ourselves, the Department for Digital Transformation. This classification allows for the first time to determine the level of criticality of data and public services. To this end, the Italian cloud strategy has identified three types of services, it's already known, and data: strategic, critical, and ordinary, in relation to the possible impacts that their impairment would have on the functioning of the country's services.
Great, that's very very helpful. And again, it's very interesting, the concept of centralizing the provisioning of services in one place to make sure that the levels of reliability are met in the way that they are determined by the government. So thank you for that. Again, as I said, driving towards the end, I would have maybe just two final questions. So the first one is really on the future proof of these schemes that we are discussing today. Obviously, a tremendous intellectual capital is going into this exercise. Market is evolving very rapidly. So just curious, Andreas, any thoughts on how, the scheme will keep, evolving along with the market?
Good question, Irena. I think on the background, we can observe the notion of complementarity across the different schemes that have been proposed by, or are in the process of being proposed by NISA. So in our perfect world, you would have devices that are certified according to the EU scheme on common criteria that are used partially to deliver cloud services that are equally certified according to the cloud scheme, and they would be accessible through 5G connections that are all equally compliant to the EU 5G scheme. Of course, that's a very graphic, very rough, vulgar way, if you like, to describe what we are seeking to do here. But perhaps on the background, it might also give a peace of mind that straight from the beginning, we started pursuing this complementarity goal. We're not seeking to create silos that do not talk to each other, and then we spend an awful lot of time looking into how to provide the connectors. And the fact that we carry out those risk assessments beforehand, we do it also for the schemes, means that not only do we benefit from other stakeholders' experience, not only we invite the experts to tell us what they think, but we also take this more analytical, scientific approach, if you like, in order to make sure that we have also some objectivity right from the start, from the design. Look, we know from the regulation that we have 5-year maintenance periods for these schemes. So this is not static legislation. It's not classical legislation anyway, because it is voted in committee on the basis of technical specifications produced primarily by a technical body like ENISA. Then each 5 years, we must have an updated version thereof, meaning that every 2-3 year periods, we would already open the door and start looking again what is going on. We already define the criteria for monitoring and so forth. And importantly, we have also some drivers from incoming legislation that are likely to reside or to rely on certification schemes in the future. It could be through NIS Directive 2. It could be through the draft CRA that is just opening up the legislative process door. We cannot quite tell. We do not have any specific suggestions for future schemes. We know that the Commission has worked very hard on the Union Rolling Work Programme, with ideas and directions, but it has yet to be made public. So we know that there is a lot in preparation and will gradually start being laid out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And last question before we wrap up this session. So are we going towards a European approach to data sovereignty in the public sector? Do you think anyone is still questioning this?
Is this for me?
Or whoever wants to take it, just a general question.
Let's see the colleagues.
Had to be dealt with at the end of the session, actually.
But just in the last 3 minutes, any thoughts? Do you think still that there is any question on any challenge at all to the concept?
What I can say, if I can give you my opinion, is that this is our duty, actually. I don't know if it's feasible, but European has seen other battles in the past, and we have always won this kind of battles. I guess this is one of the hardest ones to be deal with, and so it's our duty to do it, keeping in mind that the interest is for our citizens anyway. We are one continent as a whole, so we have to reach the objectives, bringing in mind this general principle.
Great. Thank you, Vincenzo. Unless Andreas or Nassima, you would have any final comments?
From the standpoint of an agency, the guidance comes from the Commission and the member states. It's a primarily matter for the member states to determine the exact degree of their requirement in terms of sovereignty and data localization. As in a technical capacity, an agency like ENISA can always help, as it does, proposing different approaches and considerations. But in the end, of course, the decision lies with the member states, because that's what the legislation stipulates. It is a legislative measure that we take with certification, not just a recommendation or practice. So it's a step up for cybersecurity. It demonstrates how serious the EU is about these aspects, but it requires also a more thorough analysis at the member state level and the users level. And we're there to help.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we have reached the top of the hour for the conclusion of this panel number one. I would like to really warmly thank you, all of you, because you've done a fantastic job in really unpacking a lot of these critical themes. And hopefully, I hope that our audience will agree that we really tried to provide diverse perspectives to the table. Thank you so much again. We will now have a 10 minutes break, and we will start our second panel at 11:45 that will zoom specifically into the matters of interoperability. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.